Good afternoon, folks. My name is Dr. Karen Goodenough, and I want to welcome you to the National Association of Social Workers Minnesota Chapter 2022 Legislative Session launch. In today's session, we'll be discussing what's going on at the Capitol this legislative session, how it impacts social workers and those we serve, what our NASW Minnesota legislative priorities are for this session. We'll recommend some ways for you to follow the issues and also how you can help advocate. As we begin today, NASW Minnesota acknowledges that we are on the traditional lands of the Dakota people, and we recognize the Dakota people and their relationship to this area, both historically and today, as they remain here in their home. We also want to acknowledge yet another tragic school shooting in our state yesterday, resulting in the loss of a young life and another serious injury. NASW Minnesota has a position statement on common sense gun laws because we believe good policy is critical in stopping the unnecessary loss of life. I want to get us started by introducing very quickly our policy team that you'll be hearing from today. They should all be pinned at the top of your screen. We have first Jenny Arneson, our legislative consultant. We have Beth Winterfeldt, our Social Policy Action Network Chair, or our SPAN committee. We have MSW Policy Intern MSW Policy Intern Amanda Boser from St. Cloud State University. And we also have BSW Policy Intern, I'm not sure if his camera's on yet, Brandon Wegner, who has just joined us from University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I also want to quickly introduce our amazing chapter coordinator, Shireen Retta. Shireen handles all things tech for all events, so any issues with your technology today, send a note in the chat to Shireen. Our board president, Jen Hamrick, and our president-elect is Angela Flowers. Now, today's session will be recorded and available for free on our YouTube page within the next couple of days. And please note, we are going a bit longer than our usual 1 hour lunch and learn, so today's session will go until 1:30 p.m. If you're here with us live, you can count this as 1.5 CEUs. And if you're watching the recording, you can count it as 1.5 independent study CEUs. Please make sure that your name on the screen matches your registration so that Shireen can check you in and make sure that you get those CEUs. In light of accessibility reasons, we have limited the chat function among attendees to help people be able to focus on the content we're presenting today, as it can be really difficult for people to focus on both the presenter and a side conversation happening in the chat. Throughout today's session, you are welcome to send questions and comments for our presenters directly to me in the chat. So Karen Goodenough, look for me in the chat, and I will either answer them myself, I might chime in and ask the presenter to ask them right as we go along, or I might hold them to the end, especially if I know it's something that we'll cover later in the session, or something that maybe just might get confusing if we get off topic too much, so I might hold it until later. But again, if you have any tech questions, send them to Shireen. Anything related to Q&A or comments, that sort of thing, please send those directly to me in the chat. Also, just a note that you may have had the closed captioning jump onto your screen here. If that happened and you don't want it on, you can go into your controls and change that, and you can ask Shireen a question if you're not sure how to get that done. All right, at the end of the session, we'll have some time for additional Q&A, and at that time, you can put your questions or comments in the chat, or you can raise your hand electronically or physically, and we'll call on you to unmute and ask verbally. I just want to note, however, that if you do speak during today's session and you have your camera on, then your likeness will show up in the recording of today's session. So you're basically giving us approval for that if you choose to comment that way. I also want to note that when you signed in today, you may have received a notice about agreeing to a code of conduct. And if you opened it, it's actually for our New Jersey chapter. I want to apologize for the confusion on this. We share this big, beautiful Zoom account that helps us run larger chapter events, and we share it with the New Jersey chapter. And they have clearly added some things that we need to work out with them. So please ignore that code of conduct, although it doesn't hurt for all of us to abide by, some set things. Those are not from our chapter. So at this time, I want to welcome our SPAN chair, Beth Winterfeldt, who's going to share a bit about our Social Policy Action Network Committee and how they develop our legislative agenda. So Beth, take it away.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. It's just wonderful to see everybody here, whether you are an NASW member or soon to be one in the future. Regardless, it's great to have so many social workers in this space. So a little bit more about this committee. So we are a committee that is open for NASW members. Social Policy Action Network. We currently have over 20 active committed people. So it's a really robust, involved committee. And I would say there's a lot of practice and areas of knowledge diversity on our committee. So it's open for everybody. We have some people who have been members for just a month or two and are just beginning their journey of policy awareness. And we have some who have been around for several years. And so we all work together and collaborate and serve to educate each other and learn a lot as we go. We also represent different parts of Minnesota. We have many districts, legislative districts represented in our committee. We have people in our committee who are students, BSSW students, MSU students, MSW students, policy, faculty. We have mental health, child protection, county service, disability policy, treatment, and many more kinds of practitioners in our circles. I mention this because all of these voices in our circles and all the connections that we all have to our various areas of practice are what helps us develop our legislative agenda. So you might be listening today and seeing some gaps and wondering why certain things aren't included. This happened last year and a few people stepped forward and then wanted to be involved with our work. And our legislative agenda reflects that. So please keep that in mind. If you are currently involved with a policy class or you're practicing social work in any way, shape, or form, and you have knowledge, particularly about issues in our agenda or things that you want our committee to know about, if you're a student making a policy brief and so forth, we would highly encourage you to get in contact with Jenny, our wonderful policy consultant, and her contact information will be at the end of this presentation, because we would very much like to know and benefit from the research you are doing. Just again, to make sure that we're up to date with the work that we need to be doing as the legislative session unfolds. All right, so a little bit more specifically about what we do. We collaboratively develop the legislative agenda from the beginning to the end and see it through and all of the different things that come in contact with that, such as, this event, of course, is one piece of the process of our legislative agenda. We start in the summertime and the early fall by researching, by kind of putting our feelers out there with coalitions we might be involved with and so forth, to get a sense of what other people are working on right now. We are not yet in the spot to be writing our own bills and policy, so we seek to amplify policies that are already in the works, so to say, that benefit social workers, our profession, and our clients, and also are grounded in our code of ethics and so forth. So we bring those to the table. We discuss as a committee. We establish priorities and the specific action items we're going to be looking for this legislative session. And then we work in collaboration with our own PACE committee and our racial justice committee. So we look and seek as much robust feedback as we possibly can get. Our board of directors as well. And then ultimately it's our board of directors that approves the final agenda, which it just did in the last couple of weeks. I would say that after the agenda is created, like now, we basically spend the next several months living out our agenda. So this means, our agenda is a living document and we have designed it in a way that will pivot throughout the session so we can be responsive to needs that come up that we don't know about today. By living out this agenda, we encourage all of our membership, SPAN members and NASW members to connect with our legislators, to be involved with caucuses, to follow through with action alerts and advocate throughout the session. And then our work culminates in the session recap that we have in June. There's lots of learning along the way. And let's see, I think there was one more thing. Yes, very important detail. We are the committee that together with the policy team plans and launches the Social Work Advocacy Week, which in the past has been Social Work Day at the Capitol. So that's a little bit about what we do and then how we create our agenda. Again, we work collaboratively with lots of coalition members and people and voices at the table. And I think that pretty much summarizes it in a nutshell. So at this point, I'd love to introduce to you Jenny Arneson, who is our wonderful policy consultant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you both for introducing us. And thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate that. It's certainly my pleasure to join you and to share what information we have today about where we're at with the legislative session. So today we are going to talk about how we're going to get into the details of our policy positions and our NASW priorities. And we are going to talk a little bit, as Karen mentioned, about how we can advance our work and how you can help us. But first, I want to give you some context about the work environment at the legislature and the politics at play that can either help or distract us from our goals. I do want to say that some of this information might be repetitive, especially if you have followed a session or two, if you're one who watches closely, or you might vaguely remember reading about some of these issues in the paper, some of it as recently as yesterday or the day before. But I like to cover this because it's really important that we all start with the same baseline of information. And if you don't have that information, it can be confusing. The rest of the session, or the rest of the discussion and the session can be confusing. So Minnesota is the only state in the nation that has split parties in charge of the government bodies. So the Republicans are in the majority at the Senate, and the Democrats are in the majority in the House, and they hold the governor's seat. So thus, everything needs bipartisan support to move forward in Minnesota. So you're not literally going to see split mailboxes like in this cartoon, but you are going to see really different philosophies and even different definitions of the problem. And many issues do go unresolved because of political impacts. So the session began on Monday, January 31st. If you're not familiar with it, the legislature always runs on a 2-year cycle. 1 year, they pass a budget for the state, and then the next year they work on policy and bonding projects. Bonding is just another way of saying special money that's designated for infrastructure. This year is a bonding year. However, we have the largest surplus in state history, which has been projected by the state Budget Management Department, and I'm sure you've seen some headlines, and that's what they're talking about. What they're noticing is that Minnesota, our tax revenue, is nearly $8 billion ahead of estimates where they thought it would be. Plus, the state has another $1.15 billion from the federal government in coronavirus aid. So a supplemental budget isn't required because it's not a budget year, it's a bonding year, and they passed a budget last year to take care of both years. But yet a nearly $10 billion, it's extra $10 billion extra dollars, means that people have ideas on how to spend that money. So we're going to be talking about that this session, and you're hearing a lot of proposals if you read the paper about things that cost money, and it's because of this very large surplus. It does include COVID relief dollars, as I mentioned, and they did leave last session with some unresolved business. They balanced the budget, but they weren't required to allocate all the COVID relief dollars, and they didn't reach agreement. So they've, in particular, you might have been reading about, they've been trying to allocate bonuses to essential workers since last spring. And there are also timelines attached to the COVID relief dollars, so there is a sense of urgency for those dollars. Additionally, it's a redistricting year. So what that means is every 10 years following the census, election maps are redrawn to ensure that it better reflects the population and where people live, so people have similar access to representation. So what that means is that every seat in the legislature, and there's over 200, will be up for election in 2020. And some will no longer live in the area of the community that they currently represent. This is a highly partisan process, and it will likely result in the courts making the decision. Technically, the legislature has the power to draw their own maps, but because it's partisan and because we are in a split split government, it's unlikely they're going to reach consensus. And in that case, the decision reverts to the courts. And we're expecting that decision sometime in the next month. So despite those other distractions, all of these distractions, they also have to pass a bonding bill. That's required. And so Governor Walz has announced his proposal. The legislature has not yet responded, but a couple of key highlights is he's suggesting the largest bonding bill in state history. So that's getting a reaction. He's suggesting that we spend $2.73 billion in the bonding bill. And some of the ideas he has is asset protection. So like repairing and maintaining state-owned buildings, including the U of M and the DNR. He would like to spend about $750 million on climate mitigation. And he'd like to spend about $250 million on housing infrastructure. All right. So just like us, just as we have an agenda, lawmakers have an agenda. So each caucus comes together and they list their their party priorities. And you can see them listed here. So they actually have pretty similar priorities, but they have really different approaches. So both parties have indicated that public safety is their top priority. However, Governor Walz and the Democrats are suggesting that they approach that by investing money into a safety plan, $100 million into safety plan. They want to give money directly to counties and cities and tribes for public safety needs. They'd like to support a variety of crime prevention strategies, and they would like to invest in police recruitment. On the other hand, Republicans are suggesting that the approach is also investment in police recruitment and retention, but they also are wanting mandated minimum sentences. So that means they want longer prison sentences for violent criminals, and they want less latitude for prosecutor and judges. So that's their approach. And they've also been very specific that they want to enact new penalties for carjacking. That's their approach. So same priority, really different approaches, really different values. Similarly, both parties want to return some of the $8 billion to Minnesotans, but they have really different approaches. So Governor Walz, you may have heard of something called Walz checks. He's proposing that we give stimulus direct payments to Minnesotans, either $175 or $350, and stimulus checks, a variety of approaches that are basically stimulus checks. On the other hand, Republicans are proposing permanent tax cuts. They also both want to address education. Again, really different approaches. So the Democrats want increased funding for education. They want to recruit and retain teachers of color, and they want to support education and support professionals. They're interested in investing in early childhood, affordable childcare, and they want some investment in college, particularly through public colleges and making public colleges more affordable. On the other hand, Republicans have indicated that their priority is to keep schools open. They want to make sure that there are no mask mandates or no ability for schools to mandate masks. And they're interested in continuing a variety of educational reforms that they proposed last year, such as vouchers or expanding parent choice is their approach. Also, the Democrats have suggested that one of their top priorities is to make sure that that they enact family medical leave plus safe earned and sick time. There is agreement on one thing and one approach, just the one thing, and that's the reimbursing the state unemployment fund. That might be something that you've heard as well in the news. So when during the pandemic, when there's a lot of people unemployed, Minnesota had to borrow money from the federal government to cover the pot of money that pays unemployment. And so they actually owe $1 billion to the federal government, and they also want to restore the fund so it's available in the future. And so that's going to be somewhere between $2 and $3 billion of the $8 million surplus that will likely go in that direction. All right. So this brings us to our agenda. So the purpose of a legislative agenda, and Beth spoke to this a bit, like the reason we have this is we want to provide a written guide about the issues we care about, the action we want to seek, and when we face choices, we're defining what's most important to us. I think as social workers, we often have trouble with that last part, the prioritizing issues, right? Because it's tempting to say that everything matters to us because we see the impact on the people we work with, And we know we might be the only ones speaking up. And so when we prioritize, it sometimes feels like we're letting go of issues that matter to us. And that's really difficult. And Beth spoke again to that SPAN process of how we developed the legislative agenda. And this dilemma was an extensive part of the discussion. How can we manage this? How can we let go? How do we shift? So this year, the way we've addressed it is we stated clear positions on many issues. And we're going to get to that a little bit later in our discussion here today. They're going to be there. They're all written down. They're guidance for social workers doing your own advocacy work, and really anyone who wants to know where Minnesota social workers stand. So we have clear position statements. But we also took the step of declaring 4 things as our priorities. And so what it means, if something is listed as priority, what that means is we're going to actively work on that issue this session. It means that SPAN has identified partners who also care about these issues, and we're actively communicating and coordinating with these partners. It also means our policy team has some capacity to track the related bills and share updates with you as members. And it also means that there's some strategy involved, either because we believe it has the potential to get attention of some lawmakers, or because we think someone needs to be talking about it. And lastly, we think it's a manageable number of issues for our members to follow. So perhaps like in this lunch and learn today, we want to be able to cover our issues without completely overwhelming you. So all of those things mattered, and we're in consideration for our priorities. So these are our 4 legislative priorities, and we're gonna talk about each one of them in more detail one at a time here. So our first priority is the workforce, the social work profession. And this is really intentional. It's intentional that it's first, and it's intentional that it's a priority. We thought about how we've worked for years and years to be recognized as licensed professionals, and we know that maintaining that work is not automatic. Policy evolves, and we want social workers to be there as policy evolves to make sure we continue to be represented the way we want to be represented. There are very few social workers at the Capitol. And so we know if we don't speak about our role and what we offer, no one else is necessarily going to do it for us. Or worse, others speak for us and they misrepresent us. And that's done harm, and it makes our job harder. So we decided we had to put this as one of our priorities. So we know there are issues within our profession that need attention. So right now, the social workers, we don't accurately reflect our state's population. We want our profession to be more diverse, and we want it to be more accessible for those who want to join us. And there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot of different approaches. So I just put in a little plug that you can sign up for the NASW symposium that's about revisioning the social work profession for a deeper dive into that topic. And there's a lot of other places where we're talking about the social work profession and what it is and its history and what we want it to be. But for our legislative agenda, we're really focused on specific policy that will address unnecessary barriers because they're written into statute or some other regulations. That's the focus of our legislative agenda as it relates to the workforce. So the first issue that's really specific is electronic supervision. So right now, the current statute says that when you're pursuing your license, any level of licensure, depending on your level of licensure, and you need supervision, 25% of it has to be in person. 75% can be electronic, but 25% has to be in person. We know that we'd like to change that because we know that when we expand to electronic options, supervision is going to be more accessible for people, and we can expand the workforce and perhaps attract a more diverse workforce. We know certainly one thing that the pandemic has taught us, if anything, is that we've all gotten used to to virtual interactions, and we know that there's space to do that maybe we hadn't envisioned before. We also know that if there are certain situations, perhaps somebody in greater Minnesota that would need to drive a long way in order to access in-person supervision, or just in general life, and just it's not convenient and therefore people can't do it. So we want to expand electronic supervision. Fortunately, a group of similarly licensed professionals have the same idea, and we're working together to make that happen. So it's the psychologists, the marriage and licensed family therapist, and you can read on there who has joined us. We also know that this bill is also, this is an opportunity to move forward. This is actually, the bill is in motion already. So Representative Janie Becker-Finn is the author of this bill, and recently another representative named Edelson has joined her, and she's a social worker, one of the few at the Capitol. So they're working on this bill, and they are actually they expect to get a committee hearing relatively soon, and they're going to be looking for testifiers. And we're actively in communication with them so that we can provide that testimony. So if you're listening to this and you've had some personal experience with in-person or electronic supervision that you think is relevant, or just you want to tell us your story, and that's exactly what we're looking for right now. So there's contact information from me, or you can even contact somebody in the chat right now with how we can find you so we can talk more about that. But we do expect that bill to move forward. So we're working on that right now. We have a variety of other workforce priorities as well. So our highlight some of those workforce priorities. First, we want to make sure that clinical social workers are recognized as mental health professionals, and we want all social workers to be paid for their services, particularly as it relates to insurance companies. So we have a couple of examples. So right now, this is a particular issue for school social workers. There are circumstances where we have clinical social workers in school settings with the proper license, and they're offering services, mental health services, that could be covered by insurance, but aren't. Right? And that means that they're not paid for their services, their agencies aren't paid for their services. So we're working, the Department of Human Services has formed a work group to examine that issue, and we're following that issue and expect some new recommendations in February, we hope. Another example is we have home care social workers who aren't reimbursed by insurance for their medical services, and we want to learn more about that again from the Department of Human Services and develop a strategy to address it. We also know that though we have licensing laws, we know that employers can change titles and work around those licensing laws, and that's more likely to happen when there are workforce shortages. We also know, we put that on there because we know workforce shortages are a top concern of lawmakers this year and will be an issue that comes up frequently during this legislative session. So we want to be sure that we're active and vocal about the value social workers provide and that we aren't replaceable, but rather we see this as an opportunity to address barriers so more people can enter the field of social work, like before they can enter our profession, and that's how we can address workforce shortages. We are in particular thinking about nursing homes and the staffing crisis, and that will be something that you might read about in the paper because that is an issue that the legislature is working on right now. They've addressed that as important. So we want to, our note, it's not ready yet, but it will shortly. We are working on some resources for social workers that you can share about our profession. And, just a general like one pager that you can use as a resources as you talk to others. And we are going to create one about nursing homes social workers. So if you're not a nursing home social worker, but you have an opportunity to advocate for nursing home social workers, we want you to have a few basic facts available for that. Then the last one is really related, but we know that when college is affordable, there are more people who can enter the workforce. So there were a variety of loan forgiveness programs that were introduced last year. And we want to, and there's also a number of groups that we're part of, some coalitions and partners who have proposed this as a priority, and we're going to continue to sign on to those bills. And lastly, related to workforce, and there's a lot of workforce issues, is last year Representative Vang brought forward a bill with some specific proposals that were designed to diversify the mental health profession. And some of her ideas were included in the final omnibus bill that passed, but not all. And so one of the things, unfortunately, that was not included was loan forgiveness. But one thing that was included was a culturally informed and culturally responsive task force was created. And like the title suggests, this group will be responsible or charged with bringing back some specific recommendations to the legislature about policies and procedures or regulations that could be changed to make the profession more culturally informed and responsive and diversified, right? So they are currently accepting applications right now to join that task force. So if that's something, there are some specific people that they kind of buckets of categories they're looking for, but if that sounds interesting to you, again, you can reach out in any way and we can tell you more about that. I should have said earlier on, and I'm sorry, but the slides, these will be available to you. So if you're like desperately writing things down, you can stop because we will send it to you and you will have that. so no worries. So I'm going to pause because that was a lot of workforce issues. And I'm also going to turn it over to Dr. Karen Goodenough. And if there's a question, we can address that. But otherwise, our Board of Social Work is a separate entity, and as such, they have their own workforce priorities. So she's going to share a little bit about what they're working on for our profession.
Sure.
Cool.
Thanks, Jenny. So just a couple of things that are coming up in the chat. The representative that you just mentioned, I think was Representative Vang on that
Yes.
last. Okay, so someone was asking about that. So if you're connected at all to Representative Vang, thank them for that work. Go ahead.
And she represents Brooklyn Center, the Brooklyn Northern Suburbs, Samantha Vang.
Great, thank you. And again, if you're interested at all in being a part of that particular task force Jenny was talking about, Jenny will have her contact information at the end of today's session on the slides. Shireen can share it in the chat for everyone. So if you have a particular policy question outside of today's session, you can always send it to Jenny. You can always send it to me. I'll connect you with Jenny when it makes sense also. Another thing that people have asked about is getting a copy of our actual legislative agenda. So this is our launch, and Shireen hasn't yet shared the link to the actual full legislative agenda, partially because she doesn't want you to be distracted reading it while you're watching. It's already on our website, so you can search on there for our legislative agenda, but Shireen will put in the chat a link to the full agenda for you. And there's both on our website, you can read it on there, and there's also a link to download a PDF version so you can use it, share with legislators, share with students, share with colleagues, post it on the wall of your office. You can do all sorts of things with our legislative agenda. All right, so a couple of updates on Board of Social Work priorities, and then I'm sort of bringing this into a conversation about the symposium that Jenny had mentioned briefly, because that's really kind of our next step in conversation around board-related priorities. So our Minnesota Board of Social Work has been working on a deep dive into our licensing laws over the last about 3 years, trying to update them into more plain language and simply just bring them up to date. So some of you may remember that in 2020, in that 2020 legislative session, the Board of Social Work brought forward a bunch of changes to our licensing law that were passed. We have a YouTube recording from August of 2020 or the summer of 2020, talking about what went into effect in August of 2020. So if you are interested in recapping your brain, like what changed back in 2020, Shireen, we can put that into the chat. I've got the link here too, I can share with you all. So this legislative session, 2022, you may remember last year we had said we think there'll be some more changes to our licensing laws coming forward in the next legislative session. However, the Board of Social Work had some significant staff turnover and was short-staffed for a chunk of the last 9 months or so, and they were not able to bring anything forward this session. Now, the great news is the one thing that was included in that set of changes were changes to our supervision statutes, including that recommendation of 100% virtual. And there's some languaging around virtual versus phone and that sort of thing. So we'll get you the full details on that later. But the great news is, as Jenny just highlighted, that change is now moving. Even without our Board of Social Work bringing it forward, it's moving because we are doing it in conjunction with these other professional groups. So that's wonderful. We're hoping that goes through. There likely won't be additional policy changes coming forward from our Board of Social Work until the Interstate Compact is ready. So once that is something that's happening nationally, it's a conversation that's currently happening nationally that NASW is a part of, and several social work groups across the country. And we will have to get that passed by our state legislature if our social workers are going to be a part of it. So when this happens, it is likely, my guess is 2 years out. at best. By this, they're saying spring, early summer, we should start hearing some discussion around what may be included in the compact or not, that we will make sure that all social workers in Minnesota hear about and are able to contribute to the conversation. But once the compact gets set, then every state will have to decide if they want to try to get it passed in their legislature. So it's part of law. When that happens, it's likely that we'll have to make some changes to our licensing laws in order to comply with the compact. And so in light of that, we are going to hold off on significant changes to our licensing laws in the meantime. Okay, so we are also working in conjunction with our Minnesota Board of Social Work around next steps toward elimination of the county exemption from licensure. That continues to be on our legislative agenda. It is something that's absolutely on our radar. I know people ask me about this one all of the time. And I wanted to say, and that's why I put it on this slide, if you're interested in all things licensure for social workers, I want to highlight that our symposium session, our symposium is called Revisioning, and it's about social work and abolition. And on February 25th, our session in the afternoons from noon to 4 will focus on a critical discussion of some of the structures that ground our profession. We're specifically going to focus deeply into licensure. We'll have the executive director and 2 board members of our Minnesota Board of Social Work joining us, as well as several people who are actively working on rethinking licensure. We'll be talking about the role of licensure exams, macro licensure, this interstate compact I was just alluding to, and that's currently in development. And I'll share some of my very recent research on the Minnesota county exemption. So you really won't want to miss the session if you care about licensure related stuff. If you miss the January session, it is not too late to take part in the symposium. It's 1 event per month over the next 5 months. And you'll, when you register, you'll get access to all of the recordings. So I welcome all of you to join us for that conversation in February. And as always, literally always, folks, if you have any questions about licensure or what the chapter is doing related to licensure, I sit on the Board of Social Work's Legislative and Rules Committee. That's the group that's doing that deep dive. And I also chair their advisory committee. So that's outside groups of social workers giving feedback to our Board of Social Work. So always, if you have questions or comments or thoughts about licensure and its effect on social workers, please reach out to me directly at the chapter. With that, Jenny, you can take it back.
Thanks so much. All right, so that was a lot of workforce issues. So I just want you to kind of maybe take a breath, just like kind of breathe in, because we're going to move on to some other issues and kind of change directions here. But that's, we're very busy with our workforce issues. So deep breath. And the next priority that we're going to talk about is telehealth. So telehealth. So if you're a clinician in the audience here, you know about telehealth. You really can't be a practitioner during COVID times without this tool. And I don't think I need to say a whole lot about why we think it's a good idea to make this a permanent option. I think we know that this is making mental health more accessible and much easier for people to utilize. And in particular, we know that expanding the audio only option during this pandemic time has been really critical. And we'd like to see that be a permanent option. So we know, I have heard legislators acknowledge that telehealth is here to stay. They know that, and that they want it to be permanent too. And really, it's not for them. What they're trying to figure out is how to pay for it. It's an expensive option, ironically, right? For the better, because we know more people are accessing mental health services, so therefore they're billing more for their services, and it becomes more expensive for the state. They do all acknowledge, though, that it's good preventative care and they think it's a good idea. They just have to figure out how to pay for it. So that final decision, it won't be made until next year, because it's paid for right now through this year. So it will be becoming an ongoing issue next year. It will certainly be an issue in the election year. They could this year, however, make some policy changes to change the language that indicates that audio could be permanent. So they could make that change this year. So I think though this is going to be on our priority list next year as well. In the meantime, what you need to know is you want to be a resource for your representative or your senator. You want to advocate for parity. That was a really big issue last year and a really big victory, that you get paid the same, whether it's telehealth or in-person services. You want to talk about why it's important for your clients, and you just want to share your stories. and including into the election year, if you're in a competitive place. And remember, everybody is up for election this year. The next issue that we talked about really extensively when we created this agenda was child welfare. Stan talked about this a lot, and we really wanted to make sure that we reflected the concerns with the racial disparities in our current system. We also wanted to articulate a vision that supports families with trauma responsive practices. And so you can see us expand later on, on our position later in this agenda in that larger part, but we saw an opportunity to partner with other child welfare advocates on two really specific policy proposals that bring us closer to our values. So just a word about our partner. It's called the Institute to Transform Child Protection, and it's based out of the Mitchell Hamlin Law School. And their goal is to build a more effective nationwide child protection system that preserves families and prevents trauma. So it's really similar to our own position and our own values, which is why we partner with them. So they have two really specific ideas that we support this year, and we'd like to help them advance. The first is right now, when a court decides it isn't possible to reunite a child and parent, currently Minnesota law explicitly states that the preferred option, the thing that attorneys and the courts should pursue, is terminating parental rights, even if that's not in the best interest of the child. So we know that people don't need to sever one attachment in order to form a new attachment. And we also know that when we take away a parent-child relationship, we also disrupt other relationships in that child's life with their extended family or with their community. So we want to change the language, and we are supporting the Institute in their efforts. So they have a couple of specific language proposals to make this happen. Their first idea is that we can take Minnesota's existing statute and flip the language in order to show that terminating parental rights and adoption are only to be considered when other options aren't available, when placement with your family isn't available, or it's not in the best interest of the child. Their other suggestion that would work equally well is to create a list of options for placement with the TPR and the non-kin care at the very bottom of the list. So that's their first idea. Their second issue is all about representation for parents. So currently, when a parent wants to appeal a court decision in the matter of child welfare, they need an attorney, and each county handles that process separately. So there are 87 different systems. The timeline is really short. There's no list of attorneys, and so what ends up happening is parents often don't get representation, or they miss the court deadline and they miss their opportunity to appeal or to continue their role and participation, their fair participation in the child welfare system. So the suggestion that we have is to create a statewide program that's managed by one agency rather than 87 different offices. We think it'll be more efficient. We can combine the resources, and there'll be more attorneys available for parents. And also they want to expand the timeline to give people a little bit more time to really get to represent themselves in the system.
Jenny, can you share if there are bill numbers for any of the child welfare related priorities yet in the session?
They've not been introduced. So this particular issue is still an idea. It's a priority, and we're partnering with the Institute, but they have not, to my knowledge, found, and they may have found a bill author that I'm not familiar with, but it has not yet been introduced.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Yep, but because this is a priority, this is one more follow, and certainly, we're issue alerts, and we'll talk about that later in our session here about how you can keep track of these issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So the next issue is about housing. So housing, this is a really large policy area, and you might notice that our priorities are maybe less specific than some of the other things on our list. And we know there's a housing shortage in Minnesota. We know homelessness is increasing, and we know that the pandemic highlighted these issues, but the crisis really has been happening much earlier than that. This is not a new issue for social workers. SPAN named it, though, as a priority this year for a couple of reasons, mostly because we know that housing, because of the pandemic, because it's been so exacerbated and so visible, it does mean that it is a big issue and a big priority for many different lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. So we know it's going to be a top issue. We also know it's a bonding year. So there's an opportunity for bonding bill. This is an opportunity to advocate for infrastructure. So remember, the bonding money, the $2.7 billion that Governor Walz has proposed, some of that money could be used to build housing. So we want to be kind of on top of advocating for that. We also have a particular opportunity to build. We have some capacity in this area on SPAN, because we have some SPAN members who are engaged in these policy arenas. So we have some capacity to follow this issue and to be engaged with our partners on this issue. And that's one of the top reasons it's on our list as well. So, and kind of our big priorities, our big partners, first of all, is the ARC, Minnesota, and Homes for All. And so we have two priorities that we're naming. One is we want to make sure that there's more more accessible units in the bonding, in the new housing developments, and we're working with the ARC Minnesota on that. And second is a very broad, that we would just want to improve and increase the housing stability in Minnesota, which is Homes for All. And Homes for All, if you're not familiar with it, is actually a big coalition of many, like everybody who ever works in housing, any housing advocacy group kind of is under the umbrella of Homes for All. So it's a whole lot of people. So there's a lot of opportunity. We're kind of keeping ourselves flexible and ready to adapt. I will note that a bill did come out this week. I don't remember the number. It came out in the House and the Senate. There are not that many bills that have been introduced, though, so it wouldn't be too hard to find. And this bill is requiring that a percentage, it is an unspecified percentage, so I imagine they're working out those details, of housing funded with the bonding bill will need to include, they're saying a certain percentage must be accessible of new housing units. They have not decided what that percentage though will be, but that has been introduced in the House and the Senate, which, as you may know, is kind of the first step in moving forward.
And you're saying physically accessible, Jenny?
That's right.
ADA guidelines, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, part of the ARC, and I don't want to drag us down too much of a rabbit hole on that, but part of the ARC's priorities as well is that there isn't a common definition of what accessible means. So they are also kind of simultaneously like working that as well, because we can say a certain percentage must be accessible, but that means different things to different groups, and that's a bit of a problem that they're trying to clean up as well. More on that later. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, and I've covered now our 4 priorities. Those are the 4 issues that we're actively following, and Amanda is going to give you an overview of some of our position statements, things we've taken, we've been clear is our we have positions on, and so Amanda's going to speak more about that.
Thank you, Jenny. So Jenny had mentioned earlier when we started about our legislative position statements, and these are included in our agenda. And these are issues that maybe we did not have the capacity within our SPAN committee to actively lobby for, but they also are statements that are aligned with our values, and they're going to be able to serve as a guide as this legislative session evolves. So these position statements will allow for social workers to lobby independently, if you want, with your representatives, as issues and bills are brought forward that include these types of topics. And it's going to give us an opportunity to pivot along with the session. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes briefly reviewing each of our position statements. So the next slide. So first and foremost, NASW Minnesota believes social workers are essential to the well-being of communities across Minnesota. So we are always advocating for laws and regulations that enhance and preserve the public and private practice of social work, to also protect our clients and assure that highest quality of care and create equity and transparency under the law for both consumers and practitioners. Of course, as social workers, we are always advocating for civil rights, and we oppose any policies that are discriminatory against people by race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, or any other protected status. And when it comes to health, we of course want all people to have access to quality healthcare, and that includes mental health. And as we know, Jenny just spoke about that telehealth access, and that we're trying to advocate for that and move that forward as we see it go through the legislation, because we've seen that increase in client engagement. And like she just spoke about housing, of course, one of our priorities is around that fair and affordable housing for all Minnesotans. So we also advocate for policies which support every child growing up in a nurturing and safe environment. Jenny just spoke about that child welfare and who we're partnering with, and hopefully, if a bill comes forward, that we can support that. We oppose that system of racialized surveillance, separation, and punishment, and instead are advocating for more trauma responsive policies that foster participation, restoration, safety, and resilience. So we really need to transform some current practices to prevent harm within families, and Jenny really did speak to that, so I don't feel that I need to go further. We do acknowledge our role in upholding oppressive criminal justice in government systems, and we recognize our individual and collective power to reimagine and transform society to become racially just. We recognize that racism threatens BIPOC people in both urban and rural communities, and we understand that this will definitely be an issue during the legislative session, and we will be following this closely. As she stated earlier, public safety is a big issue on both sides. And so we also are working with the Mental Health Legislative Network, and they have a number of priorities related to public safety this session. So they're advocating for systems that offer a continuum of care so that we can avoid mental health crises. And we want to make sure that there's involvement from mental health professionals throughout the process, from their first interaction with law enforcement through navigating the judicial system while incarcerated and even following release. So it's the goal to ensure that the continuum of care for mental illness is not interrupted. So one specific example from the Mental Health Legislative Network, they're advocating for calls from jail to be free to mental health case managers and family. So included in our issue statement, right, acknowledging the racial biases that come with the war on drugs, right, and that high cost to individuals when we criminalize cannabis. So we have a position on this issue because we understand that decriminalizing it could be beneficial, but noting that many mental health organizations, including the Mental Health Legislative Network, while urging that decriminalization, they also, give caution to lawmakers about the unintended consequences that could come, especially for the risk of young people. When we talk about environmental justice, it is something that's becoming more recognized and something that's becoming a topic. We understand that it's probably not going to be something that comes into legislation this session, but we do value sustainable decisions that allow all people to hold confidence in their community and natural environment as safe and productive. And finally, when it comes to fiscal policy, we advocate for policy that promotes a public budget derived from progressive tax collection and just government spending. So this includes tax credits and other policies that support low-income families. So I will send it right back to Jenny. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Thanks for giving an overview. And again, we have this written down, all of these issues we've written down more specifically. You can reference them and they're there for your use. I'm going to just speak a little bit more about the reimagining community safety. I mentioned how everybody has a position as a top issue, but the approaches are really different. What that probably means is that they're not going to reach a lot of resolution this year. And instead, if it wasn't obvious to you, a lot of it is political posturing so that it's designed to go into to make it an election year issue. Straight up. So you can expect, so the session will end this spring, but you will hear this debate throughout the summer, throughout the fall, and people will be running on their approaches or their suggestions for community safety. All right, so this next issue, I'm going to deviate here for just a moment. This isn't on our legislative agenda, but we did really want to highlight this because it is a new change to federal law and it does impact clinical social workers. And we want to make sure everybody knows about this. We did recently post a policy brief on this issue. And again, in a moment, we're going to tell you, if you aren't familiar with our website, how to navigate it to make sure you can see these policy briefs. But it's called the No Surprise Act. And the general idea is that essentially providers should be more transparent about the cost of their services. And so there are some very specific regulations that clinical social workers must now do. And it essentially means posting somewhere, my services cost this much, and telling telling the people you're giving services to your clients ahead of time what the cost of those services will be. There are a little bit more specific details on that, but we have an information page and we have some templates that you can use. And if you're a clinician and this is the first you're hearing of this, you should go to those pages and see if it does apply to you. It really does apply to most clinical social workers, anyone practicing within the scope of practice, right? So our also note, because it is a federal level and our chapter focuses more on state issues, but the the national office does have a lobbying team that does focus on national issues, and they are lobbying on this issue. They are working on this issue. In particular, they were concerned about the lack of, it was implemented fairly quickly, and there wasn't much opportunity to give input, nor is there much of a grace period. There isn't any grace period. So they are trying to advocate for some change and to advocate for practitioners. And again, that is covered on some of the information page and the resources that we've provided here today. So we're going to shift gears, but before I do that, again, I'm going to just pause and take a deep breath. If there are any immediate questions about some of the policy issues that we've covered here today, this would be a really good time. Otherwise, we're going to kind of move on to a little bit more about how to access resources.
Jenny, there's nothing in the chat that we haven't covered already. Shireen's been putting links to all sorts of things as you're talking away into the chat, so people can look for those there if they have not been. And I will continue to chime in as people ask things.
All right, well, thanks, Shireen, for keeping everybody having those links live and ready for us. All right, so we're gonna just spend a few minutes here talking about what to do now that we've covered the priorities, right? Like SPAN has taken the effort and the time, we've written down what we believe, what our priorities are. So, and the reason we're sharing them with you here today is so that you can talk about these ideas, right? We don't want just the 20 people on SPAN talking about the ideas. We want all social workers to talk about the ideas and the things we've learned here today. So we hope you take this information with others and speak to other social workers, colleagues that aren't here today, classmates, and also so that you can reach out to legislators. So we know that can be a little intimidating. So we are sharing a few tools here with you today. And really our goal is for you to feel empowered with the information you need to move forward. And myself and the policy team and SPAN, we're all following these issues, and we'd like to keep you updated during this session so you can continue to get new information. And you can write your representative more than once. That is okay throughout the session. And we're going to have some updates throughout the session. You can follow us on social media, and we're going to send some action alerts during the time where we're going to say, social workers, this is a priority of ours, and it will be familiar to you because we talked about it here today. And this is a moment in time where we need you to call your representative. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda so that she can cover a part of our website. We do have the advocacy, that NAS on our website, we have an advocacy page and we have a tool for members only. And so she's going to tell you how it works and all the amazing information that is on it.
Thanks, Jenny. So one of the perks of being a member of NASW Minnesota is we do have some pretty great tools to help you track bills, find your representatives, and to really keep up with our advocacy efforts. My tornado alarm's going off, sorry.
It's okay, it's probably happening all across the state. I may be one of the few people who live so far from one that you can't hear it here.
I feel like it's in my backyard, but
yes.
I hope it's not too distracting for everybody. But I'll keep going if everybody's okay. So like I said, we're able to find your representatives and keep up with our advocacy efforts during the legislative session. So the way to really access this is when you go to NASW's website, you would select the advocacy tab, and you can see in this upper left hand, the first picture on the left here, that's that first red arrow that says start here. That's the advocacy tab. So you can click on that, and from there, you would want to select policy information and action. And that is a members only situation. So you would have to log in to the website as a member in order to access this. So if you are a member and you don't have your login information, I would try to figure that out. And if you aren't a member, I would recommend becoming one, because this is a really useful tool, especially if you want to be involved in what's going on in the legislative session. So once you get to that page, you can see this arrow here with the NASW policy briefs. That's going to be what we update you with and what we're doing, whether it's stuff we've done or it's important information that we think that you should be recognizing. This is where you'll be able to find that. On the right-hand side as well is where we're going to see statements from our partners and people we're working with, as well as some blog posts and just things, again, that we find to be useful information that will benefit you. You also have tools to search for legislation as well as your representatives. So on the right here on the bottom, the last picture, you can see where it says find legislation. You can type in words, like I wouldn't necessarily use housing because, like Jenny said, it's a very large topic. But if you do put in a code word, you should be able to find bills. And if you actually have the bill number, then that would be, you can put it in there as well to be able to track what's going on with it. And then the last is finding your officials. So this is a very important tool, especially as we start to redistrict. Someone who was your representative may not be your representative soon. So you want to make sure you're going in here and putting in your zip code, your address, in order to find who your representatives are. So those are kind of the main purposes of these tools, but can really help you throughout the legislative session. So I'm gonna send it back to Jenny. Again, I'm sorry for the tornado siren in the background, but thank you very much.
And that's good. I hear it in my own neighborhood as well, the tornado siren. So yeah. All right. So our note too, like, this is a great tool for members, but if you're not yet a member, we do share information on our social media page. And if you go to the advocacy page, this, Amanda happened to be highlighting our members only page, but if you go to that advocacy page, you'll also find a link to our legislative agenda that's available for everyone. I think that's one of the things that Shireen put in the chat. You can also find information out about our political action committee, and they're going to be active during this election season of endorsing candidates. So if you're curious if NASW likes some particular candidates, maybe somebody who's running in your neighborhood, you can follow them there. And of course, SPAN as well. It has a website, so we have some information about that committee. So there's lots of things on that page that you can find regardless of your membership status. So now you know who your representative is, and I do want to cover just a few tips on what you, when you reach out to your representatives. If you know who they are, now you've got this information and you're just wanting to stay in touch with them, there's a lot of very easy ways you can do that. One, every single representative and senator has a listserv and they do email updates. You can sign up and you can get a monthly or weekly or whatever their schedule is. You can get email updates and they'll tell you what they're working on. All of them have social media accounts. You can follow any one of them. They all hold regular town hall meetings and not that many people go. Most of them are virtual these days, and you can just sit quietly in the background and listen, or you can ask questions. You can invite your representatives to come and speak to you if you have a small group of neighbors. NASW, we're willing to, Duluth recently did this, we're willing to support members in particular communities, and where you let me know that you're interested, and we'll help you coordinate a small group gathering, a meet and greet with your legislators and some other social workers in your neighborhood. You can also write emails. I wouldn't really recommend that you write letters just because, many of them aren't at the Capitol and it takes a long time. So they all have emails and you should do that instead. And you can also connect with your legislators outside of session. All of them are going to be running for office. And I promise you that if you like them, if there's somebody who inspires you and you want to help them get elected, if you do even one door knocking shift with them, I promise you they're going to remember your name forever, and we'll talk to you whenever you want to talk to them. So there's lots of ways that you can form a relationship. Social workers are good at building relationships, and that's what you need to do with your elected representatives. All right, so we're kind of nearing the end here. So there's a few more ways that you can engage throughout this session. So we've already talked about the advocacy page. We've showed you the arrow on where you can use it and what it's there for, but here's another link to our advocacy page so that you can follow us. And like I said, you can sign up to get email alerts, and many of you will get email alerts because you're members, and those will include action alerts, like step by step, right? We're here to say, hey, remember that thing on child welfare, that one bill that we were talking about? Well, now it has a number, right? And we'd like you to call, and it's got a hearing, and this is the day of the hearing, and we want you to follow it. That's what those are the sorts of action alerts that you get from us. If you care about mental health in particular, there is Amanda mentioned a partner called the Mental Health Legislative Network. We're part of that group, and that's a group who lobbies for very specific mental health advocacy and policy. They're having a mental health day on the Hill. They will help you make an appointment with your legislator. They will have some information available for you. If that's something that interests you, you can sign up and be part of that. That's happening on February 24th. Just so you know, most meetings with legislators are like 10 minutes. So it's not like you need to prepare a thesis or an hour talking points. It's just 10 minutes, right? And they're going to do a lot of the talking. So it's really about identifying like one thing that you want to talk about, and that's it, right? So they'll help you get organized on that. And then I'm going to turn it over so that we can talk a little bit about our advocacy week, which is a big deal thing too.
It is a big deal thing. And folks, I'm super excited to announce finally some details around Social Work Advocacy Week. So better yet, known previously as Social Work Day at the Capitol. We went to an online advocacy day, and now this year we have morphed it into online advocacy week. So Social Work Day at the Capitol this year is online advocacy week. Okay, registration will be open soon, but I wanted to give an overview of our schedule so that you can mark your calendar, you can block time at work, you can tell your students, if you're a faculty member or your students in the room, mark your calendars for these really important sessions. So this year's format is several days of learning and action, all right? The week will kick off over lunch on Monday with an update on what's happening at the Capitol related to our legislative priorities. We'll also include some guest speakers, elected officials sharing their perspectives. So that will be sort of I would say the most important, like overall kind of what's going on, kind of an update from today. A few months from now, by April, lots will have happened. So we will be bringing you up to speed on all the things that are happening at the Capitol. Then we'll invite you to stick around afterwards if you're interested to learn some more strategies for impactful advocacy. So we've done that Advocacy 101 as kind of a separate session. If you feel like you've heard that enough times, you don't have to attend it also. And then Tuesday and Wednesday mornings will feature a deep dive into some of our legislative priorities, including in-depth information from legislators and policy experts to inspire your advocacy. So as you can see, what we're telling you is when the time chunks are. So basically 9 to 11:15 each day, Tuesday and Wednesday, will be a mix of 4 different topics that we'll cover: workforce, telehealth, child welfare, and housing. And one of those will be during each of those time chunks. We just don't know which yet because we're confirming all of our speakers and policymakers. So we reserve the right to switch things around based on what our speakers need. And just want to let you know that that's how our topical sessions will happen. So you'll be able to plan for, if you really want to watch housing and hear about housing, you can either join us live during this time virtually, or we will record all of these sessions and they will be available for folks afterward. Now, meeting with your legislators is a really key part of social change. So we're making it super easy for you this year. We will provide assistance in scheduling time to meet with your legislators so that you can represent social workers' policy priorities in your region. Schools of social work across the state have designated what we're calling student advocates. And those folks are going to work with us to help set up these legislator meetings, help be present at them, to help manage the flow and that sort of things. So I want to thank those folks in advance for their key role in this really important event. So again, those legislator meetings are going to happen basically every afternoon that week, and Thursday and Friday. And as those are set up, as people register for the event, we'll be setting up those meetings, and we'll be getting back in touch with all of our registrants to say, hey, meetings with your your rep or your senator, or maybe a combination of the two, is happening at this day at this time so that you can join it if you're able. So as soon as those are set throughout the rest of that week, we will let you know so you can mark your calendar. So Shireen's going to put, oh, she already did it. She's going to put into the chat some more information that's on our website with this schedule and some of the details I just shared there. And then again, registration will be open soon, literally in the next few days. And so as soon as that happens, we'll make sure all social workers in the state and all of our faculty across the state receive information for registration for that event. It will be free for everyone. Side note, for all of you in organizations and in schools of social work, we need people to sponsor Social Work Advocacy Week because it does cost the chapter a significant amount of resources to put on an event of this size and scope. So we would love for people to support this effort. So if you are supportive of Advocacy Week and have a way to be active as a sponsor, we'd really appreciate that. I also want to talk about one other way that you can engage in policy advocacy, and Beth alluded to this earlier in our session today, our PACE committee. I don't have a slide on this because I didn't think about it previously, but PACE is our political action for candidate election, okay? And that is our PAC. And this is a group of our members which decides basically which candidates who are running for office, state and locally, decides which of those candidates our chapter is going to endorse. So I call this the people politics side of things. So what SPAN does is really the issue politics stuff. They set our agenda, they follow these bills, they're doing the work, right? But in between all of that policy work, we need to make friends with legislators and decide who aligns well with our priorities and our ethics and our values. And so we are looking for members for our PACE committee from across the state. So wherever you are in the state, if you're like, hey, I want to talk to legislators and help have a decision-making voice in who our chapter decides to endorse for office, I want you to contact me, okay? Again, contact me, Karen Goodenough, directly. Shireen will put my email in the chat again. And so if you're interested in helping us decide who endorse, please reach out to me. We'd love to have you join that discussion with our PACE committee. It's a huge election year, as Jenny talked about this year, huge election year. And so we have some resources to share with folks, and we want to be able to tell our members across the state, hey, here are some policymakers, up and coming people in your area that are running that we want you to pay attention to and help support. So help us in that effort. Back to you, Jenny.
Thanks. I think I'm sure as well, PACE is always really interested to know if there are social workers running for office at any level. So make sure you let us know that.
Always. And I should say too, that our national office of NASW also endorses national candidates. So our national candidates from Minnesota will be discussed and will be endorsed by our national office. We do state and local. And as Jenny said, absolutely any social worker running for office, we want to talk to them. Also a highlight, Jenny, I don't think we were planning to talk about today, but we're doing that little mini campaign school in June. Jenny's going to host a session training folks who might be thinking about running for office in the future. So we'll get some information about that out for sure in time for Advocacy Week. But if you're starting to think about running for office, reach out to me or Jenny, and we'll talk with you about what we're doing to help support folks that are thinking about running. We definitely need more social workers in office.
Yeah, that was one of the things I started with is, if you recall, I said, there's not that many social workers in office. So that's part of the reason our work is hard, because we need to be there in order to help people understand social work. It'd be a lot easier if we had a few people who were social workers themselves and we didn't have to start.
Definitely need more.
Who we were. Yeah, absolutely. So,
with that, Jenny, we should highlight that our own Jenny Arneson is a school board member in Minneapolis Public Schools. So Jenny knows very closely how this all runs. So thanks for all of that insight you bring to the table too, Jenny.
Yeah, of course. So happy to support any social worker who is thinking about running for office. So you can contact any of us as well, and we can talk more about that. And we will have a session in June that we encourage you to come, because really everybody, as far as I'm concerned, should think about running for office at one point or another. It's how a democracy works. And we are only as strong as the leaders who are in office. So that concludes, I think we've concluded. Oh, I've got my contact information here. So we have some time for questions.
We do, which is awesome.
There's a lot of stuff that we we talked about today?
We have covered a lot today, and I have a couple of questions in the chat here. First, I want to give Beth just a moment. She had one more thing about SPAN that she wanted to share. So Beth, do you want to jump in with that?
Yes, thanks, Karen. I just wanted to tag on to what both you and Jenny had said about representation and involvement, particularly with the PACE committee and so forth. So on SPAN committee right now, most of our membership on SPAN represents districts in the metro area. And that sort of makes sense. That's where most of the people live in Minnesota. However, we really value voices from our rural districts. There are a few of us, and we want more in our midst. So the invitation is there for all, but policy looks different in rural areas, and we want to make sure we're advocating for all people and throughout the state. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Jenny, we have a question in the chat about wondering about bill numbers and changes in the supervision requirements. I don't think we have bill numbers yet for that one.
For the electronic, are you talking about?
Yes. Yes.
You know, it hasn't, it hasn't been introduced in the Senate. I would have to look it up. Okay. Yeah, I'd have to look it up, and maybe I can do that before we leave here. It's been introduced in the House, and it's 24 something. I don't have it memorized, but I'll look it up.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for that. And just folks, you will start hearing from us a lot. So this is first week of the session. Jenny will start doing her regular updates for folks that we'll send out to all of our members. And so you will be hearing from us on these things. A couple things also talking about Advocacy Week. A couple of faculty are asking, have you talked to our student liaisons yet? So not yet. So if you're a faculty person or a student liaison in the room and you're like, wait, we haven't heard anything, we literally just set the schedule. So we will be in touch with our student liaisons soon to set up a time to start talking with them and getting them involved in our processes. Also, people are asking about an in-person rally for Day at the Capitol. We this year, in light of our chapter's new policy on COVID-related things, have decided that we will not hold anything until our state level of COVID is at low, which I can share how we're deciding that and that sort of thing. And we are not even close right now, folks. And so at this point, being it's February, and knowing that much of our policy work happening at the Capitol this session will be done virtually anyway, and some of the state and House office buildings, state and Senate office buildings are closed to the public, we have decided this year we will not hold a rally in person. And I'm bummed, and I know many of you are bummed, but it is just not prudent at this point for us to plan for that. So all of our Day at the Capitol events are the Advocacy Week events that I shared. And so I would say our sort of rallying point is that Monday over lunch session. That is when I hope everyone will come. We will have some legislators present to talk to us, much like we often have during that rally. We will also have legislators coming to talk with us potentially during some of those topical sessions. If there's someone that's speaking on a particular bill, we'll invite them in. So we will have those moments, and then we will have those appointments with our legislators set up. Okay. I do think in the future, let me just say, a rally in the Rotunda will happen again, folks. I promise you, this is not over. I do think that in the future, we will do some sort of virtual didactic training-y sessions like what we're doing this year, and then we will still hold a rally and go meet with legislators in person. And that is very powerful, and it's really important in our policy work. And we will do that as soon as the world allows us to do that. All right. And let's see. And just to clarify, they are student advocates. We're not calling them student liaisons. That's my bad on that. Okay, so someone's asking about our SPAN and PACE meetings and how they happen and can people virtually attend. All of our chapter committees meetings are virtual currently and going forward. We moved to that a couple of years ago. Actually, prior to the pandemic, we were starting to hold more and more things virtually, so social workers across the state could be engaged in our chapter, and we will continue to hold all of our SPAN and PACE committee meetings virtually. So if you are anywhere in the state, you can join us for span and pace meetings. We actually have some members who are licensed in multiple states and are on committees and join us from other places in the country, or you're on vacation, or you're working virtually somewhere else. So you can all join us virtually. Jenny, did you have something else you were wanting to say before I go to anything else in the chat?
One, I have that bill number. So if you're following the
Great.
Becker-Finn bill, that House number, it's House File 2743. And again, it hasn't been introduced in the Senate yet. They do not yet have a Senate author.
So the Becker-Finn is the supervision statute changing our supervision to 100% virtual, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Great.
Yep. The chief author is Becker-Finn. And then I wanted to just reiterate, if you wanted to be at the Capitol rally or not, though it is more open than it was last year. Last year, the entire Capitol was closed. This year, you can watch a floor session from the gallery. If you'd like, you can walk around the Capitol. The House Senate office, or the House offices, the representative offices, that building is closed. They don't even allow their interns to be in the building. So if you were to make an appointment with your representative, they would not be meeting in their offices or in that building. The Senate office, the Senate building is open, but again, it is a little bit more restricted. So just kind of wanted to cover those details.
And just a note also for Advocacy Week meetings with legislators, we are intending that those will all likely be virtual. However, if it's April and the world allows, and the legislator says, hey, on Friday, I'm going to be back in my district and I'd like to meet with your social workers at my office locally, we may offer that. So we will let folks know as soon as those appointments are set with legislators where they will happen. But again, we will intend for virtual access to those as well. Any other questions from the audience? I have so many notes in here with people thanking us and showing appreciation and being impressed with all of our work. And we're kind of kicking butt, folks. I just have to say non-violently that our chapter has really stepped up our policy game. And so if you haven't noticed that over time, or you're brand new to us in Minnesota, or you're a new social worker, we're doing a lot. So if you're not yet a member of NASW, we really encourage you to become a member. As a membership association, we are only as strong as the number of members we have. I also encourage you to get your continuing education through NASW whenever possible, because when you do that, you are also supporting our professional association and being able to advocate for the profession, because we put every dollar that we earn from all of our workshops back into our chapter. So that's why we have resources to have a legislative consultant, as in Jenny. And I want to continue to grow her contract. I want to continue to do more and better all of the time. Again, sponsorship for Social Work Online Advocacy Week and registration for those events will be open soon. Shireen's getting questions about that as well. So just a note, in the next few days, registration will open for that. And our student advocates will start hearing from Amanda about details as well. Any other final questions from our audience?
Sounds like we have a lot of people excited about policy.
We do. I love that.
So thank you again for being here and getting excited about this session. This is the start of the session, and it's a process. So we're glad that you're going to stick with us throughout the session and plan to join us in April to hear how it goes. But in April, we'll be well along our way, right? So actually, just for some additional context, bills have to be introduced before our advocacy week. So if you come to advocacy week and you want to go tell your legislator, hey, please introduce this bill, you will actually be too late. So if you have a good idea now you should use the tools we've given you here today to be in contact with your representative prior to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A couple of other things coming into the chat here, Jenny, I want to talk about. Someone's asking, is it better to make an appointment with legislators during Advocacy Week on their own or through us? And what we would say is a couple things. One is, if you're a group of folks and you specifically want to have a very pointed conversation with your legislator, you are always welcome to do that. However, during Advocacy Week, we would love it if you would coordinate with us and be a part of the meetings that we are setting up, so that often someone who's like, I'll just set it up with my legislator, I know them, and I I can do that. We have other people joining us for Advocacy Week who have never talked to their legislator, would be much more comfortable if they were in a room with you. And so it's really lovely if we can get a group of people together to do that. So if you're willing to hold off and allow the chapter with our student advocates to get those all set up and allow other social workers to join you, that's lovely. But again, always, and during Advocacy Week, meet with your legislator. So don't ever let that stop you from going and meeting with your legislator whenever it feels timely for you and during Advocacy Week. All right, a couple of other things. Let's see. Someone says, in regards to safety and working with law enforcement that pushes for co-responses, is there anything on the docket about making sure social workers are valued and safety precautions being discussed when embedded? So we're talking about social work and the police. Jenny, do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, always, first of all, I cannot emphasize just how much in the forefront public safety is at the state and local level, right? So really any possible, I mean, I don't have them all memorized, but I am pretty confident in saying any idea that you have out there, somebody is kind of working on that idea, right? Like, so it's definitely out there, and it might be at the local level. There are some things that will be decided at the federal level or at the state level, right? Like, so for example, this discussion about minimum sentences, that's not to be decided at the local level, but then there's some kind of how should I say this? Some state decision makers would like to control the ability for local decision makers to make decisions about public safety as well. So you're going to see some proposals at the state level that are really about kind of controlling like local level politics, and then you have, or maybe in response to maybe some local decisions that have already been enacted or are on the table to be enacted. So you need to follow at the state level, you need to follow at the local level. I also just kind of want to point out that this isn't one of our priorities. It doesn't mean that we're not following it. It doesn't mean that we don't care about it, but it was a decision that our SPAN committee made to not list it at the top, which means you are not necessarily going to see a lot of policy briefs about it. You're not going to see, we are not going to be able, we don't have the capacity as a policy team to follow every single piece of moving legislation at the Public Safety Committee. If it is something you're passionate about, I would definitely encourage you to follow it. There's a whole Public Safety Committee. They have hearings, they have meetings once or twice a week, and there's already a lot of proposals out there. Also, I'll remind you that it is certainly going to be an election issue. Like this issue is not going away. It's not going to be resolved in the next 2 months. It's going to be at the ballot box.
Absolutely. And this is big and deep, and it's our national office is working on it. We are, every chapter is this. Absolutely. It will be talked about. I do want to say too, that if any of our members have questions about a particular policy area, something you're not hearing about us on, you're like, are there bills about this? You're not finding it in Voter Voice, which is that advocacy page that you log into on our website. You can always reach out to Jenny and just send a note and say, hey, do you know anything about what's happening on this? The likelihood she will direct you and say, there is a committee working on it. Here's who you should follow. She could give you some direction on what to do. Let's see. And Tony Bibas, who is our national regional rep for NASW nationally, just wanted to state that safety of NASW members is on the radar of national NASW, especially considering restrictions on voting, on critical race theory, on anti-racist practice, etc. So our national office is working on all sorts of those things, as well as in conjunction with our chapters as well. So as you're probably hearing, there are so many things we are working on that we can't talk about in these sessions. If there are tons of things that we sign on to, you'll see our name if you start to read sign-on letters on all sorts of issues like student loan forgiveness and things that our Minnesota social workers care about. I sign on to those on behalf of our chapter all the time. I do not send you updates every time we do those. We would be literally inundating you. This policy work on the big picture is a huge part of our work at the chapter. So if you're ever wondering, are we doing anything about that? Are we involved in anything about that? Reach out to Jenny or I. We're happy to fill you in on what is happening. But again, don't assume that because you haven't heard anything, we're not involved in it. That's probably not true. So just a heads up on that. With that, it is 1:30. I want to thank you all for being with us today or watching the recording. If you're watching it, I want to send a huge shout out to our policy team, to all of our PACE members, to all of our SPAN members, to our policy interns, to Beth, who leads the charge on SPAN, to Jenny for being the brains behind all of this and having so much energy for social workers and being a social worker yourself at the Capitol on our behalf. We are super strong in the policy realm, folks, together at NASW Minnesota. So I want to thank you all for being here today, and I wish you all the best. And I look forward to continuing this conversation as the legislative session moves on this year in Minnesota. Have a great day, everyone.